All right. Hello, everyone. This is Father Michael Tischel.
And Strati Papa Georgiou.
And we are an
Imperfect Podcast.
Very, very podcast. I mean, imperfect.
I mean podcasts. Perfect. Imperfect. Not perfect.
Cue music.
Nice. You took it from me.
I know. I switched it up a little bit.
Nice. Well, I got distracted because Olympia walked by, so...
Oh, no problem. Hi, Olympia.
No, she can't hear you. I put the headphones in.
Okay.
She's taking a course on here.
Nice.
On here. In the other room.
I understand. So your shirt.
Oh, yeah. I think... Is it the same one?
Have a nice day. No, somewhere else. I actually haven't... I don't know if I've seen that one before. Have a nice day with a smiley face, and then below it's like in darker letters somewhere else.
Yeah, they're relatively new. Somebody got them for me.
I like that. That's funny.
Yeah.
It's cute.
I'm tolerating them.
Who's this somebody, should we ask?
It's my grandmother.
Oh, no. I was waiting for it to be like a special lady friend or something.
No. Well, I mean, she's a special
lady friend. She is a
friend.
special lady friend, yes. For sure. For sure. She is. Indeed. Well, that's wonderful, Strati.
Thank you.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So, how you been? How you been hanging in?
Good. Okay. You know, I mean, the nice thing is I do get out and I do the services.
Yeah.
I haven't been to this many services consecutively in a long time.
How do you feel about that? How does that make you feel?
Should I recline on a couch?
Yeah.
It makes me feel good. It's good. But I don't think I get to zone in on what's happening. The live chat keeps me distracted sometimes. Although lately they've been better, but I have to watch it, or somebody's gonna come in and they're gonna say something crazy or nutty or insulting, rude.
Right.
I mean, you don't even know. I mean, just anything you can imagine.
Trolling.
Yeah, anything you can come up with enters the live chat.
Right.
But it also gives people a good outlet for learning, asking questions. People say hello to each other. They recognize each other from last stream and the stream before that, and
oh, nice.
It's kind of almost like an online little community of people.
Right. Sure.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So
that is cool.
The issue is that it's a service, so I try to I've been trying to minimize the amount of idle chat, idle talk, or
right. What is it? Philargia?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing I try to do is have moments of silence in chat. So during Epiclesis, the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah, I ask for everybody to be quiet, or during other things like that. I ask people to. They respect it. I mean, somebody might not catch that, and
right.
But
it's a whole nother dimension, huh? Just it's such an interesting. It is an interesting concept as far as
I know it's
the relationship between the physical. I know that's something a lot of people have been wrestling with these days. Is that whole kind of the breakdown in the kind of physical communal gathering. Yeah. So our topic for today is a continuation of last week's podcast, which we opened up a can of worms. I mean, a very important topic, which is who is Strati? Who are you, Strati? And I think we had a beautiful conversation last week. You shared some really wonderful memories and insights about sort of your background, having been born in Virginia, if I remember correctly, and then moving at the age of 3 to Cyprus, very early on, where you lived for the next 7 years.
7.5, 8.
7.5, 8 years with your family. Your father was serving in Ayanapa, in the parish where in the town rather, where his family had moved, had resettled after the Turkish invasion and their forced departure from northern Cyprus. And and you were kind of reflecting on various experiences, both in the States, returning from Cyprus, and then also in Cyprus itself, and just how your various influences, your mom being American convert, your dad being a Cypriot born Orthodox grandson of a priest and now priest himself, how all of those sort of influences kind of form your own identity. And that was sort of your past, your identity as it's formed by your personal, familial, and cultural history. And now, we had the thought of turning more towards, who are you in the uncertain present? And certainly if you want to fill anything in as far as, what we talked about.
Now that I think about it, I think,
You're just going to close that chapter.
Yeah, we can. I mean, there's a lot of other things I could have said that, but nah.
Sure.
It's all good. I think that the concept, the idea, is what everything you just summarized is good enough for to understand where I came from.
And I really loved, especially that little vignette, the little story that you shared about driving to Pascha morning. Right. Liturgy, early morning.
Well, Pascha, it was Christmas, but
it was Christmas. I'm sorry. Yeah. Well, that and if I may, because I wanted to just remind ourselves and our listeners about that little vignette that you shared of on the way to Christmas, early morning Christmas liturgy, and your father had picked up your yaya, I believe, and you were hiding in the very back, and you kind of surprised her. And there's just something very sweet about the story and poignant about the fact that it was very early in the morning. It's for like a 5 o'clock in the morning liturgy or something like that.
Yeah, 5:30.
5:30. Okay, maybe 5:20, 25 or
whatever.
And we kind of discussed a little bit how holistic our sense of holy tradition is in the Orthodox Church. That it's not a scholastic understanding of these sort of holy texts or writs, kind of a text-based tradition, although the texts are certainly significant, but there's this kind of tradition between the lines that has to do more with, things like baking the prosophoron and the passing down literally of the leaven from one generation to the next for the holy bread that's going to be used for communion, or little moments like this with family on the way to church and things that are all sort of, I would say, kind of in concentric circles, kind of ripple effects of the feasts. And
it's living your life. It's living a life within the confines of the confines. Within the realm of the church, not in seemingly secular ways,
seemingly non-related
ways, although all of it having to do in relation to it. And I think that was the most special part about being there. I mean, I guess another aspect was my grandparents themselves were pretty not just devout, but I'd say almost sanctified, holy people. I mean,
tell me more. What are your reflections on their lives in that regards?
Well, they were people of prayer, and they were people of devotion.
What does that mean exactly? I mean, like what? How,
my grandfather was praying and reading holy scriptures and things all the time, and praying all the time, and fasting all the time, and my grandmother the same. And this is actually something that my father doesn't never tells the story to outside family, but essentially before my grandmother died, not like at the immediate moment she died, but she died in like 2003, I think, and around the time she died, like maybe 15 minutes before or something, she started to tremble. And my uncle, who was there, he goes, "Mom, don't be scared, don't be worried." And she responded, I'm not worried. Or, I'm not scared. It's the Lord."
Mm.
And I mean, it wasn't like one of those, I don't think it was one of those right at death moments where people say that it's a hallucination, it's all kinds of stuff. This was a few minutes before.
Mm.
This was some time before, a little bit of time before. And she said she saw the Lord. Obviously we're not declaring her a saint, or we're not going to make icons of her, but they were very close to Christ, and very close in that regard. And they both were. I mean, when I was a kid, my grandfather, who I'm named after, he was really quiet and really stern seeming, but by the end, I think I said this last time, he was like honey by the end.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And he was always praying. He had the Jesus prayer on his lips, so all the time. So I mean, that too also shapes a lot of things as well.
Yeah. I mean, obviously there are probably more ways that it shaped you that you're not
right
aware of or conscious of, but what are some of the ways that you feel that it shaped you in a conscious way?
That I can think of at the very moment, probably just seeing their example.
Mm-hmm.
Just seeing their example, their lifestyle, seeing his a little more. I mean, I saw his until I was 26. He was alive until a few years ago. But still feeling the love that came from, especially her, grandmothers and such, feeling the love that came from her, which I'm imagining was also spiritual, flowing through her prayers, was probably, largely an unseen sort of, but I had a great, as we say, adinamia, but like weakness or special sort of feeling for my grandmother that I didn't realize I had until after she passed away, which was an interesting thing. It's like we moved, it was sad, and then it wasn't until after when she died, and then I went back for a visit, that it actually struck me how much I actually cared about her. So that's like 3 or 4 years after moving that we actually finally got to go back. And suddenly it just hit me how much I actually cared about her, which can't be, something, I don't know, delayed affection. I've never really heard of that. So I mean,
yeah.
I've
often thought about that because, like, there, even just with like my parents or something like that, like there are times when it's like maybe on a conscious level, like that you love your family, right? I mean,
yeah.
But on a conscious level, it's like in this moment, like let's say I'm stressed about something or I'm tired or something like that, and like I don't always feel on a conscious level that affection, right?
Yeah.
But and I've often wondered about that, or like or like maybe if you just meet somebody and you really enjoy meeting them, and then you leave and you go about your life, and it's like, and you see them again, and it's like, oh, I forgot you existed.
Right.
And that feeling of like disconnection and like almost like forgetting about that someone existed, especially someone that you kind of like have some sort of attachment to.
Yeah. Like
at first that like really scared me.
Yeah. Because
it's like, wow, if I could like forget that somebody exists, like, and I really love them, like, what does that say about reality? Yeah. And like,
well,
but what can I let me just finish the thought, it doesn't end so nihilistically.
Sure.
Yeah, basically, what I came to was like I truly believe that our conscious level of like perceiving the world is like a fraction of a percentage of like who we actually are. And that there's so much that goes on beneath the surface of who we are.
Yeah.
That if it came down to it, like if someone's health were at stake, or like, someone like a loved one if I found out, that they were sort of, maybe their life was at risk, that the love that I have deep down inside is going to well up in ways that I didn't even know existed, know. And it's all there. It's just under the surface of my consciousness,
I guess what makes it to me stand out so much is that it happened, okay, we moved. I think when I was told that she was going to die, well, I just never I talk about a childhood sort of not an intellectual affection, a totally under the sort of from childhood, something that you don't remember as well as other things, and this is interesting for me because I never really thought about it this way, because I think for the longest time, I don't know, it was really interesting, and I think I agree with you. Most of our I agree with you. It just that was the first time, and that was the first time that it became so apparent to me that you can have an affection for somebody and not even know you had the affection for them.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah.
Because I think when I was told she was going to die, it hit me hard, but not quite as hard until I went back for a visit. And then I said, we're going to go downstairs, because we were at an upstairs apartment above them. We're going to go downstairs and we're going to see my grandmother, we're going to see Papu, which is grandfather. Papu and Yaya, and then it struck me that she's not going to be there, and I was like, oh my gosh, and anyway.
No, it's interesting. I mean, to me, it's interesting how things like grief and love, like sometimes we feel like we need to force those things.
Right. Yeah.
Like if someone passes, like I need to feel sad because they passed, right? And ultimately, okay, if you need to do that a little bit, just to make yourself feel better, whatever. That's really harsh. We may have to cut that out too. But no. But what I'm really getting at is that I've experienced this a tiny bit myself, and I've heard and read that people really experience this. Who have had gone through tragic losses and things. Is that grief is so unpredictable and kind of unexpected the way that it all happens, and love is too, right? You can't force these things in many ways, and
So I think in many ways it was their example of life and their simplicity. The simplicity part is huge, simplicity, but also their archontia, their
so like
simple
dignity.
Nobility, but in a
nobility, right?
Nobility, but in a simple nobility.
Sure.
That so many...
Not a pretentious...
No, not at all pretentious. That they had, that I think is huge, because it does kind of reflect a Cyprus of old that does and does not exist anymore. And when I say that, I mean, like, there are still some people are like that, but that generation that lived before the invention of not the invention, or before the coming of electricity to their island, is becoming smaller and smaller. And that generation that lived in, basically lived in an environment of the Orthodox Church as a, literally, their day and their night, their cycle of life was the cycle of the church, were one and the same almost. Everything revolved around the church, not just in an intellectual, not even in an intellectual way, but in a living it way. And they were a generation that, they were kind of the last generation. I mean, my father caught it, so obviously he's, they were the oldest generation that was alive, by the time they passed, that had experienced that sort of thing and never left it. They all continued to live it, which clashed with the rest of reality around them, clashed with, not that they,
what was it? I guess what was the it that they continued to live?
They never changed. I mean, you know how you say sometimes that we say elderly people don't change their ways? Mm-hmm. In that sense, they didn't change who they had been for 40 years up until the invasion, or 40 years, not more, 50 years until the invasion. Mm-hmm. For my grandfather, they didn't change.
What was the 40 years up from when up until the invasion?
from their birth to the invasion.
Yeah.
Yeah, from their birth to the invasion.
What do you mean by they didn't change their ways?
They continued to live the life of the church like they did in their village, but just not in their village anymore, and in a world that was becoming more and more globalized, secularized, all these ideas and secular concepts and things coming in, new economic realities that they were coming into contact with, and new lifestyles that they were coming into contact with, and probably for no other reason other than this is what they knew. They rejected all that and just continued to live their life like they would have before. And I got to see that, is what I'm getting at. I got to see that sort of, a Cyprus completely immersed in the church and in its traditions. Even though I didn't necessarily, I had video games and I watched cartoons and things.
Yeah, you weren't kind of reflecting on it in a kind of mature way because you were a kid.
Right. I didn't know.
So you have those impressions that you can now kind of go back and reflect on.
I think simply just being near it at all influences me in so many ways I don't even realize. I hope it does anyway.
Sure. Yeah.
So I guess that can be discussed as who I am now. I mean, that kind of segues it. I can't talk, you can't, who was it? Well, they say you can't talk about who you are now if you don't talk about who you were.
Yeah.
So I guess that kind of seg.
So there are a lot of different avenues. I feel like, and I think the description that you have already offered of your past is really rich. I guess one question is, how does here's one of those psychotherapist questions, right? It's like, how does it make you feel? How does
I'm leaning back.
Good. How does the richness of your heritage make you feel as you, like Strati? Like, in other words, I mean, the way that I heard you reflecting on it, it was a really beautiful reflection, and I didn't get the sense that you were like, sort of like, feeling burdened by the beauty and richness and sanctity of your heritage. But I guess, just maybe on a more personal note, like, are there ways in which that might feel like a high bar, I guess, as far as your personal life?
Yeah, I think that I have at times thought, how could I, but at this, that sort of high bar kind of thing that at the end of the day, they were also people.
Sure.
And they probably had many mistakes that they did in their lives. So without trying to idealize them and put them on a pedestal, there is a certain element of, and some of the elements are just simply come with the territory of living of being a child of the 21st century. I mean, born in the 20th century, but majority of my life has been in the 21st. The age of the internet, the age of technology. It's just we live a different reality than them.
Sure.
My grandparents specifically. That even my living grandparent lives now, where she basically lives in the world I live in.
Yep.
Is on Facebook, is on whatever. They never watched TV.
Right.
They never. I mean, I think they might have listened to the radio.
Sure.
But like I said, they were very much. So I'm disconnected in that sense of. So I can't compare myself easily.
Right.
I can't put myself in the shoes of a person who basically lived in an era where they took out the oxen to plow their fields with. I mean, by the 70s, my grandfather was using a tractor, but I have to imagine that early on.
Sure.
He used oxen or whatever. So it's hard to.
I know.
Have that same standard for myself of purity, because there was purity in that. They were not exposed to things that I'm exposed to, so they had that clean, sort of, I'd argue more clean, with but not to say that it didn't have its, issues. I mean, they were from a period of revolution too. They were, not that my parents, necessarily my own grandparents, but there was a revolution in Cyprus against the British, and many Cypriots were fanaticized over this. Nationalism towards the Greek. They wanted to. They wanted to reunite with Greece.
I see.
Have Greece be Cyprus and Greece be one, the same
right.
nation. And my grandfather and grandmother, but were part of that movement.
Yep.
So I mean, they experienced another danger, a spiritual danger, which could have resulted in hatred, could have resulted in all kinds of things. I don't think they fell to it. Obviously, towards their later years. I never saw that, but you still heard my grandfather from time to time have a word, say a word about all that, and it was always the I don't know, the party line, if you may. It was terrible. We lived under the British in poverty. When in reality, yes, they lived in a sort of poverty, but at the same time, the British actually brought a lot of good advancements to Cypriot life, infrastructure things that helped. My grandfather probably would never hear any of that,
So kind of coming to terms with the humanity of these people. They were humans. They were living after the fall,
and they clashed with their other grandchildren too. In terms of lifestyle, they couldn't understand, well, why are you going out to eat all the time, and all this stuff. I don't know if they criticized the way they dressed or not, but I never heard that they did, but you could imagine they would, because we're talking about people that wore long skirts and pants even in the summertime. Yeah,
that's interesting. So I mean, I in many ways, what I hear you saying is, there's a sense of gratitude, a sense of enrichment that you feel from, your past, a sensitivity to not wanting to over-idealize anybody or anything, recognizing that people are human, that it was messy even back then. But certainly that there was and this is kind of the paradox of
definitely a higher moral standard,
right,
too.
Sure, yeah. To me, it's like the phenomenon of sanctity, right, is so interesting, because sanctity takes place within the broken vessel of fallen humanity, and so what does it mean that somebody is more sanctified, And I don't even know if the question is. I don't even think it's a helpful question of like, how is it possible that someone's more sanctified than someone else?
Right.
You know what I mean? Because it's like, I don't know if that's even a fruitful question.
Although there is an example of, I think it was, who was it? It was a desert father who said, another desert father went to him and said, why is it that more people come to you and nobody comes to me? And he just looked at him and he said, I love God more than you do.
Nice. That's interesting, yeah.
But he said it without any
it was
pride.
A guileless kind of...
Yeah. He was just explaining to him, I just happen to love God more than you.
Well, there's probably something to that.
I do agree with you. It's not like, we can't say like this saint was more holy than this saint. Like,
right.
Put like a yardstick out and start measuring sanctity.
Right. Yeah, so this connection between past and present, and you were mentioning that you sort of now feel like you're ready after we've been talking for this amount of time about various things.
Who I am now.
You maybe have a sense of where you
want to go. A lot of it
is who you are now.
It's predisposition as well. In other words, personality disposition. So, but all the things of my past formulate everything I think of. Not everything, but a lot of what make up my predisposition as well. So I'm very much a person who's interested in history, in theology, in culture, and not just cultures, but my own culture, something that a lot of people, I think, don't much think of. And when I say that, I mean like I am and I was more so in the past into folk dancing, Greek dancing, or and then then the history and stuff. So I think that was always there as to who I like. I remember when I look back, I didn't realize it, just like how I felt about my grandmother, but I didn't realize it until recently. But the class that I spent the most attention in was history. Even in elementary school, I didn't like school, even back in elementary school. But even through that, I now think back, and the class that I can tell you the most about was history class. And filmmaking. I even made little movies in Cyprus, and either with my sister or with friends. And so then add those kinds of dispositions towards that. And then theology. I would have theological conversations with my dad, even as a little child. So add all of that with the richness of the Cypriot, religious culture, with a deeply theological person, which is Father Panayoti. Add in a sprinkling of interest in movies and making them, and it just, this combination of things has formed who I am today, and what things interest me. I care a lot about theology. I care a lot about even ecclesiology. I care a lot about a lot of these topics that I don't think I would have had I not had the father that I had I not lived where I lived.
Yeah.
Or at least I wouldn't have had the deep perspective of having lived there, right? I might still have had a deep interest in a lot of them, but I wouldn't have had that sort of, salt of the earth sort of perspective.
I guess one question I have is, how do you feel about what's your relationship with creativity?
Well, it depends on what can you elaborate a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, the creative process. I mean, you work in TrisagionFilms as, you're the producer, filmmaker, editor. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of
creative
director.
Director, yeah.
Yep. So there's a lot of creating going on, right?
Yeah, sure.
I guess what is your I mean, it's a personal question as far as what you do, but it's also kind of a general question as far as how do you see the creative process, I guess, and creation and,
the business, if you may, in quotes, I hate saying it, like the business we're in, but actually the business we're in has to take on a form of respect to tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And I've listened to a lot of discussions about traditional Greek music, or Byzantine chant for that matter, and the underlying sort of thing that these chanters or musicians, or even dance instructors or musical or people who study these things or whatever, whenever they're asked about this exact thing, about creativity or about tradition itself, what is the creative process? And it's always with looking to the past, mm-hmm. With great respect, but at the same time putting your own self aspect of your own self into it.
Sure.
So that's what I do. We don't alter the ethos of orthodoxy.
Right. But
I definitely add in sometimes even provocative elements, like mm-hmm. at the St. John of Damascus, where we had the Islamic call to prayer in it, mm-hmm. which actually upset people, mm-hmm. Having that in there. Mm. And that's me. That's me mm-hmm. putting a maybe to somebody blasphemous concept in a video about the great St. John of Damascus. But the reason I put it in was to provocatively show you give you like a small taste of what it was like to live under Islam.
Mm-hmm.
And you're hearing that cry 5 times a day, every day, for the rest of your life. And that sort of giving you taste of it, and so that's I think that's an interesting. I mean, this makes sense, right? So when it comes to traditional music, you listen to the old recordings, and then you add your own spin to it.
Right.
You don't completely recreate it from scratch.
Sure.
So just like we don't recreate Orthodoxy, we don't make Orthodoxy fast food in the sense of like we don't make fast-paced fun videos about I don't know. They're not
quote unquote relevant. I mean,
quote unquote relevant,
right?
And
when that sense of relevance as immediately gratifying.
Yeah, we watch what secular creators on the internet do and then copy them, but add an Orthodox element. What we do is, to the best of our ability, try to portray Orthodoxy, not without adding our own flavor. Right.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
And I think, and that's what I do in creativity. It's like making an icon. You shouldn't make an icon looking like Picasso and call it an icon. You have to look at iconography of centuries old and then add your own little.
Right. Well, and I think the thing that interests me is when you're talking about the ethos and the ethos of Orthodoxy. Could we say that the ethos leaves room for the unique voice of the individual creator, whether it's an iconographer? In other words, what I'm trying to say is, on some level, you could say, well, I'm trying to maintain the ethos of Orthodoxy through this creation, and then also add my own voice. But I think another way of putting it would be to say the ethos itself of Orthodoxy allows for us to plug in fully to the tradition of the church, through the mysteries, the sacraments, and everything, and also be our unique selves. And I think,
absolutely.
And in fact, the ethos or the plugging into the mysteries makes us even more our unique selves than we were before, right? I mean, we become more. There's that beauty of like, even like a lot of people talk about this in like monasticism, where, especially I think in the West, there's this kind of caricature of monasticism as like Monty Python, like all those monks marching along, kind of like solemnly praying. They all look exactly the same, cookie cutter, kind of like you're an introvert, you know, and then the reality of it in Western monasteries, but I think I would say especially in Orthodoxy, is this beauty of like, it's not, you don't have to be an introvert by any means.
No, not whatsoever.
And each individual monk or nun has such a beauty to the uniqueness, I think.
And yet a similarity.
Yeah, sure.
Too,
sure, there is a similarity, yep.
Depending, although I've seen some
out there.
Some outspoken monks. You are a unique, your unique voice within a tradition, a unique voice within the realm of the church and of the that's and that's what I try to portray. So creativity, when it comes to creating these things, like I said before, I can't make a water slide type, have like a fun theme park sort of interpretation of all this stuff. We have to do it from the confines of the. And some people don't understand it, and we've had people in the past who've come to us and wanted to help us, but just could not see that sort of, wanted us to, make it more secular, I guess, in its, in its delivery, if you may.
Sure.
And we can't do that. I mean, the church didn't survive for 2,000 years by intact, and not in 1,000 pieces by conforming to every philosophical outlook of life or every lifestyle that it came across.
Yeah, I guess one example,
whether it be iconoclasm or
right,
whether it be iconoclasm or Arianism or
sure,
whatever heresy might have been in style at the time, the church was like, wait, no, not quite. Anyway, sorry to interrupt.
No, I think it's just one thing that I've thought about as far as like tradition, like the continuity of tradition, and also the uniqueness of individuals, and also ages, right? Is like, for example, like some of the more contemporary saints and elders, Saint Porphyrios, Saint Paisios, now Saint Sophrony of Essex, and how there's a sense in which, at least I would argue, that I would never doubt their adherence, their devotion, their loyalty to the holy tradition of the church, right? Mm-hmm. While simultaneously seeing a surprising sort of uniqueness in not only each of them individually in their personalities, but also in what they offer to the church in our particular time and place. So, for example, St. Porphyrios's contribution, quote unquote,
sure,
of, this way of love, this way of gentleness, and the kind of bloodless path, right? It's like,
right.
So in many ways, it is found in the tradition of the church, right? I mean, you can find it. I could Saint John Chrysostom and others,
right.
But there is also a very,
you kind of focused on it.
Yeah, focused on it and sort of brought it out and
expounded upon it.
And I think in many ways, if we were to ask him, and he himself said this at various points, that focus is based specifically on the unique challenges of our times versus other times. Mm-hmm. And similarly with someone like Saint Sophrony, in the way that he set up his monastery, in the way that even the iconography that was employed, and I mean so many different aspects and elements are, as Metropolitan Nicholas Hadzi-Nicolau of
Mesoghias,
again. Yeah. Anyway,
I can't remember the rest of it.
Yeah, I can't either. But
sorry,
like that.
Continue.
Yeah, that's okay. When he visited Essex, his comment was, "This monastery looks totally wrong," because they purchased it, and they were basically like converted chicken coops, and it's like it in many ways, like the structure of it is very non-traditional.
Was it a farm?
I think it was a farm, something like that. And then they converted all this stuff, so they didn't build from the ground up a lot of the buildings, so it doesn't. He said it looks all wrong, but it feels more like Mount Athos than Mount Athos.
Wow, that's a huge statement right there.
I know. Yeah. So this whole idea of the spirit of it, the spirit of it being very powerful, very present, not
to take anything away from Mount Athos.
No, I've been to Mount Athos many times, and it's very formational. No, if anything, it's as a wise man emphasizes, it's good and better. It's not bad and good.
Right. It's good and better. Yeah.
So Mount Athos is way up here, right? And maybe some would argue that Essex is not even close to Mount Athos.
But what he's saying, making a point.
He was making
more,
a point.
Not totally rhetorical, but there's like a level of it, maybe, if we're to interpret the man's.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Well, no. I mean, here's another element to this.
Yeah.
Is an Athonite monk friend of mine who lives in a hermitage outside of one of the larger monasteries. He was speaking with some of my former roommates who are now hieromonks outside of Boston, and they spent a lot of time on Mount Athos and in other parts of like the Eastern European kind of Balkan area at monasteries and things like that. And he, interestingly, when he was talking to one of them, said, in America you have an opportunity because in the old countries, there is this beautiful adherence to tradition, but that also comes with a double-edged sword insofar as some of the things that aren't necessarily part of the capital T tradition of the church are also adhered to very strongly.
Depends on where you go, but yeah, there is.
Well, no, I mean, I think everywhere, if any culture that has a very long-standing.
Yeah, but when I said depends on where you go, I meant like if you go to that mountain village, as opposed to a bigger town,
right?
They might have some more obscure and local stuff. Like my cousins told us these things that their mom learned as a kid, and my dad heard them and goes, he makes kind of a face and goes, "That's probably from her village,"
right?
We didn't do that stuff.
Sure.
I mean, if there's varying degrees, I do know exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
I do think though there's varying degrees of.
There's the village to village stuff, and I would even argue like church architecture, like for example, like the Russian style, like how the dome developed, right? From the traditional Byzantine style dome to the cupola, right? The onion dome, the onion, and I'm told that from an Orthodox architect that the onion dome had strictly practical.
Right, it was from snow.
Snow, exactly, right?
Yeah,
so and now it's like, whoa, it's the onion dome, like, and some
Russian.
people might say that that if you don't have the onion dome, whatever. So anyway, I'm saying some people. I'm not saying me.
Sure.
Right.
I do.
So I guess all that I'm saying is in that comment, both the comment about Essex and then also the comment from this Athonite monk, is that being able to discern. I'm looking at a book by Andrew Louth now called "Discerning the Mystery." Being able to discern the mystery of tradition.
Yeah.
And understanding that we worship a God in spirit and who exists in spirit and truth, but who also inhabits, who became flesh. So that's a paradox, right?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Spirit and truth, who became flesh.
Right. That's
right. And being able to understand that in light of our tradition, where tradition itself. And I know this is a really tricky thing because there are people that I think really take this and run with it in the wrong direction, but tradition is not static.
Oh no, not at all.
Right. And I think that's an important point because there's
it's exactly what I'm saying.
Right.
It's not static because while it is and it isn't. It is and it isn't. You look at the overarching tradition. You don't alter it completely, but you add a perhaps different a style, or perhaps a different take, a different feeling. I don't know how to explain.
No,
we see it in Byzantine art. I mean, it's the most static art in all of history. Where it literally, if you from one century to the next century, it's different. It's almost completely different.
Sure.
And that's due to artistic expression.
Sure.
But at the same time, not breaking away from the mystical, spiritual tradition, which is iconography.
Sure.
So that is what we're trying to do.
Yeah. I think it's interesting, and I mean, I guess my comment about some of these contemporary figures is. And I mean, maybe it's just because I don't have as much of a trained eye for these things as far as iconography, or maybe it's because I'm living in this era versus others. But my observation from just a, everyday Joe Schmo, young priest, kind of observation is that...
Just a wide-eyed,
overly romantic, whatever. Is that the creativity of the traditional creativity of these people, whether it was through their pastoral care, like St. Porphyrius, or whether it was through their iconography and architectural styles, like St. Sophrony, who himself was an artist and then became an iconographer. There's something surprising about, on one level, you could make the argument that the process of adhering and then your own creativity is somehow linear. So it's like from point A to point, V, I'm going to, adhere to the tradition, and then from point V and beyond, to the end is my own creative twist.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not this kind of like disjointed or linear or kind of linear.
Right. No, it's very, like
it's very intermingled and.
Oh yeah. I think that's the beauty of Orthodoxy, is that it's very much a thing that flows. And I think that's the reality of eternal life too. It's not a well, now you are saved, like we hear, we see in Protestantism, where it's like, and
when you die, the moment,
well, not even when you die.
Right. Yeah,
this is the moment I'm saved.
Yes.
Today I'm saved because I raised my hand in church and whatever.
But it also makes me think of eternal life starting at the
death
when you die, right?
Right. No, that's not the case, right?
Yeah.
Because you can live eternal life from now. But yeah, there's so many different directions we can go to this, and this quickly derailed from. Well,
but to me, it's
related.
It's related to the creative question, because that's to me is what I'm interested in with your work, because you have a creative side.
Yeah.
And you're using it with TrisagionFilms, and I'm interested to hear you reflect on that process and that.
Sometimes I think I'd be great at making comedy. I know that sounds weird, but like I've done videos where I had comedic cues in, and I was right on the dot. And then I sit there and I go, I don't anymore as much, but I used to kind of say, oh man, I only make these kind of slow videos. With the picture that moves slowly and this and that. But that's where the creativity comes in, because I add spice here and there. I add.
It's not like it's kind of peppered in.
It's peppered in, and I think that's what an iconographer does to some extent. He peppers within without disjointing, right? Yep. Without being disjointed, he peppers in his own. I think that happens without him realizing it too. Right. He the iconographer, he just sort of does.
I guess this is very interesting, because I'm thinking about it. It's kind of connecting things for me too, and I think you're right. I think in many ways that's the safe way to do it. I guess
what's the safe way
is to sort of have it like the main canvas, you could say, is kind of evidently part of the tradition, and then the uniqueness is sort of peppered in. I guess in thinking about these kind of major players, if you will, in Orthodoxy in contemporary times, I think in some senses I almost feel like it's flipped for them. Like for someone like Elder Sophrony, or even St. Porphyrius to an extent, maybe St. Paisius also to an extent, is that it's almost like everything looks different, and until you take a second look.
Yeah.
Like even with the iconography, and this, I know that this is intentional because there's a book out now by one of the nuns from Essex who was a disciple of St. Sophrony, who's also an iconographer, and I had this observation when I went without reading about this, and then I read about it and I was like, wow, I'm really glad that was right, because it was really interesting, is that when you first look at all the icons, they look very plain and kind of unassuming. And there's a sense in which you could just kind of like pass by them and just be like, okay, those are interesting icons. They almost look like they're not really that great. Like at first glance.
I need to see them. I don't think I've seen it.
And don't even look online. You just got to go. Aww. It's not even worth it. I mean, you can look online if you want. But then when you look closer, especially at the faces, something like pops out and like surprises you.
All right, I gotta look it up. All right, continue.
This is just my own observation. You may not have the same experience.
I mean, I'm, you know.
So like at first it's just like, okay, and then you look closer and it's like, whoa, there's like this like, it's like gentle and very kind of like unassuming, and then there's this like really powerful revelation through that, I guess you could say. I almost feel like what Father Sofroni was trying to do was make the forms and the sort of externals. I think what he was trying to do is he was trying to make, and this is probably a clunky way of saying it, but he was trying to make the forms and the externals of the faith as transparent as possible. So that, oh boy, I gotta go.
All right,
we
can continue this.
Yeah,
another
let's continue
time.
it.
Okay, cool.
So let's continue it. All right, thank you very much, Strati.